Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation, Sustainability in the Last Mile, How to Use Planet-Friendly Practices in E-Commerce Fulfillment. I'm Jessica Young, Associate Director of Research and a Business Reporter here at Digital Commerce 360, and I will be your moderator for this afternoon's webinar. So thank you guys so much for joining us. Today, we're going to talk about how some industry experts are addressing online retail's environmental impact and talk through ways that they're making strides by tweaking their fulfillment operations to be more sustainable. These leaders are doing innovative things, from pledging to reduce their corporate carbon footprint, to reevaluating delivery schedules and truck loading, to changing the way consumers think about when an order should arrive on their doorstep. And they're influencing how other e-commerce executives, shoppers, shipping carriers, and even politicians conceive of the climate change threat with the conversations that they're bringing to the fore. To recap recent successes in last mile sustainability and explore the possibilities of what the industry can do in the future, we'll be hearing from some really great panelists, so get ready. We've got Chelsea Mosen, Director of Impact and Sustainability at Etsy, a marketplace that sells unique handmade items from crafters, as well as vintage goods. Chelsea, who holds an MBA in Sustainability from Bard College, is responsible for powering Etsy's operations with 100% renewable electricity and has led countless initiatives to minimize her company's impact on the planet. And then we have Daniela Perlmutter, Senior Vice President of Marketing at Bring, a cloud platform that helps retailers like Coca-Cola, Albertsons, Party City, and AutoZone, as well as logistics providers like Day & Ross, Seco, and LSO, scale or optimize their last mile delivery and fulfillment. Bring recently said sustainability has become one of the top 3 priorities for its customers and partners. Unfortunately, our third panelist, Maddie Rotman, Head of Sustainability at Imperfect Foods, had a last-minute emergency and is unable to join the session today, but I'm going to step in for Maddie and share some thoughts on her behalf based on some preliminary phone calls that we had so that the audience doesn't miss out on her really excellent insight. Imperfect Foods is a web-only company that got its start selling fruits and vegetables that grocers arbitrarily turn away for cosmetic reasons. And that can be anything from odd shapes to scarring and cracking, or pieces that are over or undersized. The company launched in 2015 with the goal of reducing 40% of unspoiled food thrown away each year in the US, and to make nutritious and affordable produce more accessible. A quick housekeeping note, our aim is to leave 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the session for questions from the audience if we don't run short on time. So please feel free to send any to our team. And with that, let's jump right in. The pandemic caused a pretty massive surge in e-commerce. According to Commerce Department data, the online sector spiked 31.8% in 2020. That was the highest growth rate of any year that we have data for, and more than double the increase in 2019. Obviously, that has exacerbated a pre-existing problem in terms of the effect of online shopping on the planet, with emissions stemming from deliveries and the like. So to you guys, did this cause the industry to take a look in the mirror and better recognize the urgency of the issue? And do you feel like people are talking about it more and following through with action? And Daniela, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, so thank you, Jessica. First of all, thank you very much for having us here. And yes, we definitely saw a tremendous impact of the spike in the e-commerce on the last mile delivery and on the carbon emissions in the last mile delivery. And as you said, our mission really is to help retailers and logistics providers to scale up and optimize their entire last mile delivery. And when you look at the last mile delivery, the last mile delivery accounts for 53% of the total cost of shipping. And so this is where we saw also an increase, of course, in carbon emission. And what we saw really is that the awareness for sustainability has gone tremendously, also gone up. And we issued a retail barometer. We published it in January, based on a survey we did with retailers, and 34% of them said that they were reducing carbon emissions in the last mile delivery. 20% of them said they actually have net zero commitments, net zero emission commitments and pledges. And so if 2020 in a way is the year of awareness and understanding that we need to make commitments and really change the way you design the last mile delivery in the entire really supply chain, I believe 2021 is really the year of action, and we're seeing that. And you know, if I have to say, we just got the first results from a survey that we did amongst hundreds of retailers in North America and Europe. So this is really hot out of the oven, and 42% of retailers said that they were planning already to implement technology solutions in 2021 to address the sustainability issue in the last mile delivery, and specifically the carbon emission in the last mile. So, you know, this is really, this means that we have to help them act. This is really why we also launched really the sustainability tech practice. And I'm really excited to have these conversations because, you know, the awareness and then drive the action is really the goal of what we're here today for.
Absolutely. It certainly seems like it's top of mind for everyone at this point. Chelsea, anything to add on that subject?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just say that at Etsy, we don't control the shipping on our marketplace. Our sellers ship directly to our buyers. So we are not able to really look at it as from a detailed last mile delivery perspective as easily. But I will say we saw the same thing in 2020. Our emissions from shipping, so from our seller to our buyer, almost doubled between 2019 and 2020. So that was just a huge increase. And actually in 2020, Etsy packages traveled over 850,000 times to the moon and back. So that just gives you like a scale of the magnitude of this issue we're trying to solve here.
Sure.
We've been calculating and measuring our emissions from shipping since 2016, and have really been tracking levers for reduction since 2019. But I think really what changed this year was consumer awareness. When we conducted research with buyers in 2018, before we launched carbon offset shipping in 2019, very few of them understood the environmental impact from shipping. When we asked them about the environmental impact from e-commerce, they immediately went to waste and packaging. That was really the only thing on their mind at the time. I think since 2018, it was changing gradually, but all of a sudden, so many trucks were coming to your door last year that it became really hard to ignore. And our reliance on e-commerce was just spelled out. So I think this 2020 really did drive consumer awareness around this problem.
And actually, the next question for you, Chelsea, so you hit on a little bit of this already, but Etsy really has been an industry leader in setting aggressive sustainability goals. You guys have been offsetting 100% of carbon emissions generated by shipping for years, and you're targeting 2030 to be net zero for carbon emissions. So tell us a bit about the genesis of these programs and how you're measuring your footprint and maybe any success that you're having with reducing it. But also as kind of a second part to the question, you know, Etsy more than doubled the gross merchandise value of products sold through the platform last year amid the pandemic. I'd imagine it's difficult to balance the marketplace's fast growth with your environmental pledges. No? I mean, tell me if I'm wrong here.
That's a good question. You know, as I said earlier, our absolute footprint really has grown substantially, almost doubled. But for me, I see this as an opportunity. We have now more influence and leverage in advocating for changes that reduce emissions, which is one of the most impactful things that any company can be doing right now. So for instance, this year we did set that aggressive net zero by 2030 goal, which means we need to reduce our absolute emissions by 13.5% by 2030 from a 2019 baseline. So considering the growth we've seen, that is a huge reduction. Especially when you consider that we are including in that our emissions for all of scope 3. So things that we don't directly control but take responsibility for. So like the shipping that our 4.7 million sellers do directly to their buyers. And in 2020, that was 75% of our total corporate footprint. Or another example, the emissions from packaging that our sellers use in 2020, that was 13% of our footprint. And another example is the energy our sellers and buyers use on their own devices when shopping or selling on our platform. So we have 8.5 years to meet our aggressive reduction goal. And so much of the change that we need is really systemic. It requires policy change and an even regulatory playing field. So what we're doing right now is immediately prioritizing and really leaning into public policy advocacy around the decarbonization of transportation. And so, now that our emissions have grown and that our business has grown, we have more leverage in that space. So that's actually, in some ways, a really great positive for us. Another area that we're focusing on is supplier engagement. It's really another piece of the puzzle around reductions that takes time. So that's an immediate priority for us. We're reaching out to carriers and to partners to advocate for that zero emissions delivery future that we're trying for. So this increased share of the commerce footprint actually does actually help us continue to make our voice heard and to be loud around the need for more sustainable e-commerce.
Yeah, not resting on your laurels at all. Apparently, you guys have very aggressive goals. A couple points to make for Imperfect Foods too. They similarly had a really big year, so I'll mention a few things that Maddie and I discussed. For a bit of context, the online grocer reported triple-digit growth in 2020, and they ended the year with a revenue run rate of more than $500 million. Maddie's team also pledged to become a net zero carbon company by 2030, and they were citing the environmental threat caused specifically by the food system, which Maddie mentioned accounts for 24% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So here's kind of how they worked up to that goal. When the company launched, it launched as Imperfect Produce, and the business model was really centered around its food sustainability mission. And the focus was all about sourcing foods that could have gone, would have gone to waste. So Maddie was saying that, food waste is really the #1 means that we can help mitigate climate change, just because of the, sheer volume of emissions that are involved in that process. So as the business kind of started to evolve and they realized that they were making meaningful changes, in the food system, they started thinking about themselves as a potential logistics solution to the food waste problem. And they were trying to, the end goal for them was to become kind of a bridge between the farmer and the consumer with this new kind of marketplace. So, over time with all of their growth, they realized that they could take that product sourcing concept of how to reduce waste and extend that to the entire business operations. So that's kind of when they started becoming, quote unquote, a sustainable grocer. And that's when they pledged to become a net zero carbon company by 2030, which is 20 years before the Paris Climate Agreement deadline, as I'm sure Chelsea and Daniela know. Imperfect Foods is, currently in the process of reducing emissions, and then they plan to start offsetting in the next couple of years. So during that reduction phase, they're kind of taking account of all their operational processes. They have a carbon consultant, and they're using a third party to measure all emissions across the entire business. And Maddie was really mentioning, they try to be very transparent, that this, like Chelsea mentioned before, where consumers think of like the trucks that are, well, packaging more so, but now they realize that the trucks are on the road. But beyond that, they're, Imperfect Foods is looking at their marketing spend and emissions associated with the cloud, emissions associated with purchases that they, use to buy building materials for their facilities, just to kind of understand all the pieces of the puzzle so that they can figure out, what levers to pull. And she also mentioned, for Imperfect Foods, tracking is very important. So one of the data points, similarly to what, Etsy also tracks, she was telling us that in 2020 alone, Imperfect Foods last mile delivery emitted 12,800 fewer tons of CO2 than if each of their consumers had, each of their customers had made those individual trips to traditional grocery stores, which is the equivalent of taking 2,800 cars off the road for the year. And we'll get into some more of the specifics of, how that works for them in a bit. But, going back to you, Chelsea, again, something that you started to mention earlier, but with Etsy being a marketplace and you guys not necessarily having control over how each individual seller is handling fulfillment, what have the conversations been in terms of incentivizing sellers or buyers to be more environmentally conscious in the last mile? How does that third-party platform model make that effort more challenging? But with that, is there also a bigger opportunity because of the scale of your network?
Yeah, it definitely, we have less control than some retailers would around our footprint, but we actually know that our sellers and our buyers both care very much about sustainability. So 87% of our sellers reported that running an environmentally responsible business is important to them. So while we don't control fulfillment, we know our sellers are trying to do their part. One thing that we are looking at this year is making it easier for our sellers to source and use more sustainable packaging and helping them understand how that packaging really has an impact, not from only a waste perspective, but also from a carbon emissions perspective. We hope to start launching that work in late summer, and we really expect it to evolve as circular packaging becomes more viable for marketplace models. Circular packaging really is the future, and we're excited to see how we can help figure that out over time. We're also testing iterations of signaling local shopping in our marketplace. Local is great because buyers love supporting their local communities. They tend to get their deliveries faster, and it tends to lower emissions substantially. So that's been a really important thing that we're trying to test and learn from in the marketplace, and an easy win, actually.
Conversely to the challenges that Etsy is facing, Imperfect Foods is dealing with a fulfillment process that is very much in their control. So they do take responsibility for basically all phases of those operations. And the company's mission and their products have sustainability at the core, but like I mentioned before, they're committing to that in all aspects of their business, especially last mile delivery as well. So they use technology that helps pickers pack customer orders in a way that consolidates products, while considering refrigeration needs they are dealing with food safety, and digital tools that help drivers maximize how boxes are loaded into trucks so that they aren't shipping a bunch of air. So here's a bit of a recap for what Maddie and I discussed earlier about how all of that plus this neighborhood routing concept are key components of sustainability issues. And to launch right into neighborhood routing, that really revolves around limited delivery zip code on one day a week. So, her example was if you're a Monday customer, all of your neighborhood gets deliveries on Monday. So they're trying to create density in areas so that they can, keep their carbon footprint low and have that as part of their delivery model. And that's really a very large thing, that the company hangs its hat on. And as for, how technology works within that, their pickers and pack, it's literally from soup to nuts, from when pickers and packers, when a customer places their order, they put everything that they want in their cart. So the company knows what's in the cart. So using that back-end technology on the size of the box that's needed and the packaging material that's needed. And then that gets, told to the picker. So the picker gets instructions and, kind of a notice saying, hey, I've got Susie Smith's order. You need 3 large boxes. Only one of them has cold items in it. So make sure you put an ice pack and an insulated liner in the first box and, put all the items in the second and third box. So they really tell the picker based on the customer's order how to pack things most efficiently. And then also, routing software is obviously helping Imperfect Foods put orders together. And they've also done a bunch of predetermined engineering work so that they know how many boxes of each shape can fit inside the van. So they choose their van shapes based on box sizes, and they want to make sure that they're not shipping air. And then they also place the number of orders into each van or with each driver to ensure it fits, again, with technology. So it's very tech-driven, from everything from how big is the product to what we're putting, in the box, to how many boxes do we need to, be able to deliver each customer's order, how many vans, etc. So that's, it's really part of their process from A to Z. And Daniela, this brings me to you. You mentioned earlier, Bring recently launched its Bring Green Sustainability Tech Practice. So you're really intimately involved in how technology can help solve environmental issues. How can other retailers or marketplaces start integrating those types of tools that have worked really well for someone like Imperfect Foods, but in a way that gels with their particular business model? And what problems were you guys trying to solve for clients with the tech practice? I'm assuming the ideas to offer retailers new tools that can help them meet net zero goals.
So So first of all, I'd like to address a few things that that Chelsea mentioned and Jessica, that you also mentioned from Addy. There's you know, Chelsea, you mentioned the fact that you don't necessarily have the control over sellers and you drive the awareness. And I think what we're seeing, and you said, you know, how you can help with the packaging, but you know, not necessarily with the delivery. And I think, you know, what we're seeing is a clear reflection of the reality that it's an ecosystem play. If one side does something, it isn't enough. It has to, in order for any pledge to really have an impact on the environment and on our planet and the ecosystem, all the players need to play together. So it's the sellers, it's the buyers, it's the consumers, it's the drivers, it's the logistic providers, and of course the retailers. And in that mix, we need to have all the people who are involved, all the different parties involved in this network, really, to play along and to have the shared mission. And I think this is really what we're seeing here, that there is a shared mission, there is the will. Now, how do we provide them really the skill? How do we provide them the technology solutions? How do we provide them the best practices? And what we're seeing is that there isn't a single play that works, just, you know, for one. That it's really a mix and a host of plays. And this is really why we launched the sustainability tech practice, because it really comprises, I would say, three main parts. First of all, it's the best practices. It's really understanding, first of all, you know, what are the different ways that retailers can reduce the carbon emission in the last mile. And you mentioned a few ways, and we'll address them in a minute. And Chelsea, you actually mentioned also the circular part of packaging. There's also a circular part in delivery. So you deliver, but instead of sending a truck empty back, if there's a return, you put the return in the same truck. And so you make sure you never go with empty trucks, like empty shipping miles, if you say it to me. So there's the best practices to understand really what can be done and what is also more relevant to that specific retailer or the marketplace. The second part is, of course, the technology solutions. So how do we optimize routes? How do we you know, reduce even the amount of trucks on the road by optimizing the load also on the trucks and selling full truckloads as opposed to less than full truckloads? How do we make sure that we also, yeah, you mentioned the packing, that in Perfect Foods that Maddie talked about the packing of, and to make it much more efficient in terms of the packing of the different orders. How do we also make sure that it's not just the efficient packing, but also the load on the truck itself, that it's, you know, in line exactly with the route that the driver is taking? And then there's also the issue of local fulfillment, right? We're seeing that it's much more efficient, and the amount of carbon emission can be reduced by 25 to 30% if you ship from store versus shipping from the warehouse. So this has a tremendous impact. Now, if you do route optimization and local fulfillment, you can reduce between 7 and 9% of the carbon emission in the last mile. Now, this has, and this is, you know, this has a tremendous impact on the urban, you know, in cities. It has a tremendous impact, of course, when you aggregate it in a collective way. So really, the technology solutions that we provide, you know, should be in line really with the best practice and the prioritization that retailer or the marketplace has. And lastly, it's bringing the ecosystem together. So, you know, we have our technology based on the cloud platform, but we also have what we call our Bring Delivery Hub, where we partner with approximately 40 delivery carriers that enable our customers to launch very rapidly new delivery services or increase their capacity if they have the need for extra capacity. So the idea is that now we're also pushing to make sure that we have green fleets, you know, eco-friendly fleets. So already today, about 20% of our hub partners, 20% of them are already all green, which means that they have electric vehicles, which means that when they integrate with us and provide delivery services to our customers, that is really a green fleet that provides a delivery. So this is another, so really three ways that the sustainability tech practice helps is really with the best practices, the technology solutions, the ecosystem, and of course everything around it is about the reporting. And Chelsea, you mentioned a lot about the reporting and making sure that you know exactly each part, what drives higher carbon emission and what do you address first. So the reporting on the one hand helps with the prioritization, then it helps with execution. So for instance, if we know that our customers have some fleets or green fleets, and some fleets maybe have hybrid fleets that some are electric vehicles and some are not, how do we enable our customers to choose and select specific fleets based on their goals? So maybe for a certain area, certain service area, they would want a green fleet, and maybe in another area they can't have green fleets because maybe they don't have the vehicles, but they prioritize a different type of fleet. So this is really the ability also to select based on also the reality that the customers have in play. And then it's of course the optimization of everything and understanding how far you are from your target, the carbon emission target, and the pledges also that you make. And how do you also communicate it to consumers? Which is, as we said, it's not we can't undermine the importance of communicating that to consumers as well, because consumers have a choice. And if they have a say and a voice, they would probably prefer the sustainable delivery. Whether it's, you mentioned that Maddie has like 1 day a week that a specific neighborhood gets the delivery, the orders delivered to that neighborhood. So essentially, consumers have to be part of it. I mean, they have to want to and to accept it. So they have to have the will and the ability to choose it. Right, so this is another means of really this, the solution is also bringing in the customers, bringing in their voice for them to choose also the sustainable delivery method that would enable really the reduction of the carbon emission.
Thank you, Daniela. That was really great to hear all of those factors kind of articulated, and I think that for such a problem that seems so insurmountable to a lot of retailers, to be able to have some sort of blueprint or, like you said, best practices, a place to start, I think is fantastic. So hopefully, a lot of retailers will be jumping on board this year. Another question for you, Daniela, because you're in the trenches with retailers and logistics providers, what's the biggest challenge to integrating sustainable fulfillment practices into a business, but what are also the potential payoffs if you get it right?
So I believe the key challenge, first of all, is understanding where to start. So you make the commitment, and then okay, so where do I start? So first of all, you need to understand what is the the reality. What is the distance? How many trucks do I have on the road? What is the carbon emission really that is emitted in the last mile? And one key issue is really also managing the partners. And Chelsea mentioned it with the sellers, that you don't necessarily control them. So that's another data point that we got really from this this research that we just recently did. We haven't published it yet, so it's now, I'm giving you a sneak preview. But yeah, so I'm just reading here the stat that 32% of retailers mentioned that in 2021, they will establish a set of requirements that their partners will have to commit to in order to partner with them. So, retailers are not just, pledging for themselves. They're now going to also put a set of requirements for their logistics partners to make sure that the carbon emission reduction target is achieved. So, this is one key issue. Again, it's now, how do you enforce it? First of all, how do you track it? How do you enforce it with technology in an automated way, so that you really make sure that your partners are really using the green fleets? How do you assign the orders to the green vehicles? How do you, make it in an automated way that really seems very seamless to the retailer? And essentially, when you do that, and you do that together with optimizing the routes, you get really this win-win situation. And this is the payoff. Because if you think of batching orders, that means you have less vehicles that need to be on the road, right? If you have less vehicles that need to be on the road, you have less expenses, you're much more efficient, your routes are much more efficient. And so it's really a win-win situation, because you're reducing the cost and you're also reducing the carbon emission, and you make the world and the environment more sustainable. So it's really it's a payoff that happens, first of all, even when we think of just the operational cost. And another key payoff is actually the brand loyalty, the brand differentiation, the ability to communicate it hand in hand to customers in terms of what it is that the customers are able to choose the more sustainable delivery. And then you communicate to them how much they actually helped the retailer to achieve the net zero carbon emission reduction, or the pledges. You really drive a differentiating brand. You can also decide that you provide this this choice. If they choose let's say a green or sustainable delivery, they could get maybe club member awards. And so you actually drive customers to be your club members. And by that, you're increasing really the loyalty of your customers. You're increasing the loyalty to your brand. And it really is then a three-way win situation. It's for yourself, for the business, for the environment, and for the people, the customers, who actually enjoy a more a better experience.
Danielle, this is really interesting, and I was wondering if I could jump in and ask you a question, something I've been long curious about. I hear you talk, and I hear you mention this kind of future where the end consumer, when they're checking out online, could potentially designate that they want their delivery in an electric vehicle. I would love a world like that. That would be wonderful. Sometimes though, I wonder, is that at odds with optimization, and how will we get through to that point where we can optimize routes and still have the customer choose an electric vehicle? Is that possible?
First of all, anything is possible, especially when technology is in place and you turn every problem into a data problem. Anything is possible. But no, realistically, you know how when you book a flight, then some airlines already tell you how much carbon emission you're using. So on the one hand, it's great because it shows the awareness and it drives the awareness. On the other hand, you as a consumer, you don't really have a choice, right? So you're just told how much bad you're doing to the environment. I know, and I'm not trying to, to put off someone traveling or taking airplanes, but the fact that you can provide customers the visibility into different delivery models. So today, what happens today is when you check out from any online shopping experience, you have to choose a delivery, right? Next day, same day, next week, and that comes also with a cost. So imagine now you add another line that says sustainable delivery, and in the back end, the smart engine is the engine that actually calculates that if you batch several orders based on that customer's address, because you have by then already the address, you have already the data of all the other orders that are in the same service area. So you can know when the truck is supposed to go to that service area, and you just put the line of when that delivery will come, and you just brand it as a sustainable delivery. And for that, instead of putting a price, you put loyalty points. Would you choose that?
Absolutely, yes.
I would.
But what?
So just to explain how this happens, why is this together with the optimization of routes, is because if you have in the back end the smart engine that puts together all the different data points, and that's where it becomes complex, but luckily we have technology to solve that complexity. You put in so many variables, such as the truck, the number of orders you want to put in there, the location, the distance, the shop, if it's shipping from store or if it's from a warehouse, the inventory, your customer profile. Are you, what is your profile? Are you, in a way, a high customer value? Are you a loyal customer? Are you a club member or not? What is your preference? Do you prefer delivery in the morning or anytime? So we put everything together in the smart engine, and that optimizes the route of the driver that then is assigned with that truck and the different orders.
Is there any chance there's ever any unintended consequence where if you don't have enough scale of demand for a delivery mode like that, you may actually make the route more intensive or overall more intensive from an emissions perspective? Like
So,
not that specific route, but delivery overall. If you're taking a special stream of packages out, and then you kind of throw off the optimization of the other deliveries, are there potential unintended consequences of trying to allow consumers to have that EV choice or EV delivery choice? Does that make sense?
So are you asking if there's a sort of a lack of capacity in a specific, let's say, route, and you need additional capacity? How do you manage
if you don't
that?
have enough demand for electric vehicle delivery on a certain route, then are you sending EV out, potentially empty or partially empty, and then actually, potentially driving unintended consequences that you wouldn't want to? Or I guess my question is really, what type of scale do we have to have for that to work? And when do you expect that we could see something like that? I haven't seen any retailers do specifically like an EV delivery option yet. I would love to see that.
So we've got customers who are talking to us about really selecting only EV-based fleets. So those are retailers that use internal fleets, but also third-party fleets, third-party carriers. And some of them have electric vehicle only cars. So they do the deliveries either with electric vehicles or with electric bikes, for instance. We have such a customer in Europe. And so then the need is really to select them specifically.
So that on the consumer side, I'm just thinking like shopping at one of the big retailers or the big e-commerce spaces and being able to designate as a consumer, oh yeah, I want this delivered via electric vehicle, and having that a viable option, as opposed to something like an IKEA, which is already really ramping up EVs for all of its fleet. I'm excited about the vision you're presenting. So.
And actually, sorry, go ahead, Daniela.
I'm saying this is a vision that I actually believe it's the way to achieve it is we won't come out with everything in one go, and it really has to be based on the milestones that retailers define, and again, every retailer will prioritize differently their way to get to such a vision. But I truly believe that in order to get there, where every single part of the network, really the delivery network, and the fulfillment, really is part of it, and knows how to play their part. That's why the ecosystem play and doing it as a tech practice, and having such conversations with market leaders like yourselves is extremely important.
So this actually leads me
to take us off track.
No,
Yeah. Sorry, Jessica.
Not at all. It leads into our next question. We were talking a bit more about delivery fleets and how they're a very big part of the problem. And so my question to you guys is, how can the industry address sustainability with the big shipping carriers? Or is it a matter of finding alternatives that are doing more to be environmentally conscious? And I know, Chelsea, you had some thoughts on this when we were speaking initially.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think, the next 8.5 years are going to be absolutely critical in driving substantial reductions. And we have to focus on the major carriers. They're the ones that have, substantial traffic right now. And if we don't focus on them, we're really not focusing on the problem. So now, from my perspective, is the time to engage those carriers and engage them actively and regularly. When we reach out to the carriers, they report that other stakeholders aren't really getting in touch with them about these concerns. They're not, advocating for electrification of vehicles. They're not really asking about their carbon footprint as much, and they're not really incorporating that into their sourcing process. So I'd say, obviously, it's really important for companies to include these types of questions into their strategic sourcing. But just also general reaching out to customer representatives to simply ask basic questions can drive a lot of change. It might not feel like it at the time, but those questions are being logged and recorded in the sense that how much customers really care. So it can be hard to do sometimes, but I think it's very important just to reach out, ask those questions over and over again. And also just add that it's not just emissions that we should be highlighting when we reach out, but we should also be talking about health impacts, especially in vulnerable communities from fossil fuel powered vehicles. This is a climate change issue. It's also a public health issue, and it's an equity issue for our communities. So depending on your priority for your company, there are many ways to bring this issue up and get leadership buy-in, to advocate, and to engage carriers. So I think that's just a huge thing that we can be doing right now, and we have to bring the major carriers along with us as we ask these questions.
You mentioned kind of the overlap of all of those, concerns, and I think that that's a good point to make. I'll tell you guys a little bit about part of Maddie's point of view and how they kind of think through their delivery fleets at Imperfect Foods. And one, she would agree with you, Chelsea, in that I remember she mentioned 100 companies emit 71% of global greenhouse gases. So it's not enough just to do, a fleet here or there. There does have to be that larger discussion to kind of change how the big guys operate. Imperfect Foods themselves does own their own fleet. She was mentioning that they have like kind of a hub and spoke model. So they've got fulfillment centers across the country so that they can purchase from regional growers. And their goal by 2022 is to have the company increase and improve its regional sourcing by 15%, so that they can reduce the number of trucks on the road. And their plans are to continue to deliver once a week to each zip code to limit carbon emissions. She mentioned, they really do operate their whole last mile stretch. They've got hundreds of drivers on the road every day. They've got their own trucks and vans. They have their own imperfect drivers, although she did say about 5% of orders are using a third-party carrier like a FedEx. But 95% of deliveries are done by their own employees. And she also mentioned while they don't have electric cars today, that's mostly because they don't exist yet for the size of the vans that they need. So they are really excited, to be looking into this over the next couple of years to bring on more electric vehicles. And so, they had their first couple of routes delivered by an electric vehicle about a month or two in LA, I remember her saying, and that she was really excited about just the possibility of that, Chelsea, like you said, just the possibility of what the future looks like not that long from now. And that, their hope is that will really help support their net zero emissions delivery model that they want to get to by 2027. So in the meantime, they're kind of thinking about route destinies and how many orders they can deliver per van so that they're not shipping air. So that's kind of how they conceive of the, delivery fleet at this point. I don't know, Danielle, if you had anything else to add on that, or if we should jump.
Yeah, I would like to, get back also to what Chelsea said about the very large carriers that really need to, in order for the big change to come, we really need the large carriers in it. And we are seeing actually a lot of commitments from the very large carriers. If you think just of FedEx that made the commitment of investing $2 billion in the carbon emission, and it's also in the fuel efficiency of airplanes, but also in trucks and vehicles and electric vehicles. And there's they mentioned like I believe 500 electric vehicles, electric trucks that they purchased. And so we do see actually the very large carriers putting tremendous funds aside for it. And this is where, the technology is there to help them also manage the routing of them as well as selecting them. We also see the use of robots and drones also eventually in the very, very hyper local areas. And this is again the idea of understanding when do you select the robots and the drones and when do you select the vehicles. And that has, again, it has to be in an automated way for it to really scale and meet the demand that's coming from the retailers. So it's this match. Jessica, you mentioned the puzzle right in the beginning. It's definitely a puzzle, but the picture is beautiful at the end.
I would like to. Go ahead, Chelsea. No, go for it.
I would love to see those large carriers go a little bit faster, and I would also love to see the options that you laid out around, could we have electric vehicle delivery through those large carriers that you could, as a customer could choose. That would be amazing.
On your wish list.
Totally.
I would love to move on and talk a bit about messaging. Again, something that we started to hit on earlier, but a couple of questions to you guys on this because I think it's really important. In February, Digital Commerce 360 and BizRate Insights surveyed more than 1,000 online retail or shoppers, and 13% said that knowing retailers support causes that are important to them, including the environment, entices them to pull the trigger on a purchase. And 36% of retailers that we surveyed earlier this year said that showcasing brand values, such as sustainable practices, is quote unquote critical to optimizing conversion rate this year. But at the same time, we've got this seemingly contradictory set of consumer expectations that items are delivered like yesterday, right? The Amazon Prime effect. How do we reconcile those two? And then I'd like to get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty in terms of messaging. So Chelsea, I think you had some initial thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that expectation for what has become standard delivery, like next day or 2-day, can really drive up emissions. At Etsy, we always say special takes time, and our buyers generally know that if they're getting something that's customized or personalized, it's going to take a little bit longer, and that's okay. Luckily, the pricing signal for a slower shipping mode generally aligns. So, it's a little bit cheaper to ship on a slower mode, which generally has less emissions. So whether it's the seller or the buyer paying, it often works in the favor of reduced emissions. But I think we do have a lot more to do to make it easier and more desirable for buyers to choose that slower mode, or an electrified mode for that matter.
Yeah, Maddie made the point about this kind of balancing of consumer expectations versus people understanding that excuse me, has a negative impact on the environment. And she talked about the importance of explaining, like, here's why we do it. Here's, how we clearly convey to customers, what our model is. And eventually they say, oh, that makes sense. That's why I can only get my groceries delivered, once a week on this particular day. And it starts to kind of change people's minds a bit in terms of how they're thinking about things. Not to say that will necessarily completely offset the Amazon Prime effect, but that, does seem to help. And to take that conversation a step further, talking more specifically about marketing and how that plays into the dialogue on sustainability in the last mile. It's important for retailers and marketplaces to convey those initiatives to consumers, right? Like, I would think that messaging is really an essential piece of that puzzle, like we said, in order to speak to consumers who are maybe increasingly demanding this corporate responsibility mentality, but who also might simultaneously be gravitating toward, 2-day or even speedier shipping, which is not good for the planet. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Making sure consumers are aware and have access to the information is very important. And we know that they care. So, one of the very first things we did to take immediate action around our footprint was to offset all of our emissions from shipping. So, in addition to working on reductions, we just decided to just immediately we'll take corporate responsibility here for all of this. And we decided to place a badge in our cart indicating that that's what we were doing. Of course, the cart is a very sensitive place, so we were keen to look at the results of an A/B test. And when we compared a cart with the carbon offset message in it versus a cart without the carbon offset message, this was back in 2019, we were really pleasantly surprised to see a conversion rate uptick for the cart that had the carbon offset shipping message in it. So carbon offsetting is the very first thing we're doing to take responsibility, but it's an important way for consumers to understand that there is even an impact in the first place. We were pleased to see that consumers cared about that. I will also add, though, that consumers are more and more over the last few years attuned to environmental claims, and they're looking for authentic information. So many of us are working to reduce our carbon and climate impacts, but none of us have all the answers yet. So really, it's important when we talk about talking to consumers that we speak authentically and transparently and to build that trust with consumers. And that's something that we're always trying to balance, that authentic, accurate information with something that is easy to understand and short to read.
I think it's interesting the point that you make, because I remember Maddie talking about this. It's about articulating what your corporate responsibility is, what the problems are that you're creating, and conveying that to the customer so that, like you said, they don't think that, well, we've got this whole, climate change thing handled, we're good to go now that we've offset, carbon and things of that nature. That it's really, it breeds a lot of customer loyalty when you're just upfront with them about the problems, the challenges that you're facing, the things that you're trying to do, and saying, hey, there's room for improvement, but here's where we are in terms of reaching our goals. She also spoke about, this kind of idea of conscious convenience, which Maddie said her team speaks about very frequently, internally. Just, again, that balance of how do we explain to consumers what our thought process is. And she said messaging is really everything. It started with explaining why imperfect carrots are okay to eat and why, they're maybe not integrated into our traditional food system. What does it mean to be an odd-shaped eggplant? And, they've really been pleasantly surprised over the last 5 or 6 years in terms of, changing consumer behavior there. This is now part of the lexicon in the grocery conversation. And so taking that messaging and taking it to the next level to say, hey, let me tell you why we're our delivery fleets are on this particular schedule, or things like that. So she said it's really about communicating that. And, I know Daniela Bring is acutely aware of how crucial messaging is when you're grappling with how to handle those consumer expectations on fulfillment. So what considerations, should retailers be taking into account here? And you hit on this a bit before in terms of brand loyalty, but I'd imagine that that's a big part of this conversation too.
Yeah, and I totally agree with what you said, and also what Chelsea said. It's it's a transparency. I would just add one more part, that it's bi-directional. So it's not just communicating why we're doing what we're doing and providing more information to make them aware. It's also the ability to have them choose, and it's the ability to have customers provide feedback and rate. And one more part that I'd like to add in it, that it has to be on this a seamless experience. So if you're communicating on a mobile app, then on that mobile app and you're communicating, let's say, like Maddie said, it's okay to have an imperfect carrot. When the delivery is taking place and you communicate when the delivery is coming, and the sustainable delivery is coming and why it's coming on that day, then that's the time to actually communicate also what is a carbon emission reduction they helped reduce thanks to choosing that sustainable delivery, and were they happy with it? And then you also get the feedback, and you use, it's a bi-directional communication at the right time with the right channel.
It's interesting that you said that, because in Perfect Foods, I was also talking with Maddie about this new packaging return program that they had, and that was a result of hearing customer feedback. They, in a lot of the packaging, those liners that are made with very heavy duty plastic and the gel packs that go in there for refrigeration, consumers were left with this and they didn't really know how to dispose of them. The plastic liners are not recyclable, like at a curbside level. You'd have to physically take them into the stores. And when COVID hit and a lot of those recycling programs were, no longer available to them, Imperfect Foods heard what their customers had to say and started this aggregation, recycling model where, like you mentioned earlier, Daniela, while their trucks are coming to deliver new orders, they're picking up the old gel packs and recyclable liners and bringing them back, so that you don't have an empty truck on the road, and they're in aggregate, recycling those plastic liners for everyone, and also sanitizing those gel packs to be reused through a third-party service. So again, like you said, it's having that two-way communication can also really lead to other business solutions. I am very aware that we're short on time here. So I wanted to give you guys a last question here before we wrap up. I am curious, if you're an e-commerce executive listening in on today's session and you want to bring some takeaways back to your team, what are those? What are some next steps that retailers can start thinking about taking at this point, or marketplaces for that matter? And I'll leave it to either one of you guys. Feel free to jump in.
So I think and I wrote a few thoughts, but essentially I would say three main issues that I would take away from here. First of all, it's an ecosystem play, and we need everybody to be part of this network vision to take along the sustainability, to make the significant impact that we all need to take. Secondly, there's the technology in it, together with the will and the awareness, and together with the data, is key. And there is no single method of driving sustainability. It's a host of methods, and we need to enable the choice and the multiple models that would enable retailers to really adapt what is best fit for them in order to drive sustainability. Because if it's too complex, it just won't happen. So we need to help also simplify that complexity. And lastly, I truly believe, as market leaders in our own respective domain, it's our collective duty to make this happen. It's time. 2020, I believe, was a year that brought the awareness very high up, because we started seeing trucks on the road and more trucks, and 2020 was maybe the year of awareness, but 2021 is the year of action, and we've got to act. And that, I believe, is the key message. Let's start acting.
Chelsea, any closing thoughts for you?
Pretty much the same. The time is now to act on climate change. An easy, effective place to start is advocacy, public policy advocacy, or advocacy with your suppliers and carriers. And then authenticity in the process is just important. Don't be afraid to say the good, bad, and the ugly. Consumers and your customers will appreciate that.
Well, thank you again to Chelsea and Daniela for taking the time to be here with us today, and also to Maddie, who participated in our discussions ahead of time. We really appreciate all of our audience members tuning in, and hope everyone has a great afternoon.
Thank you so much.